Welcome back to another episode of Parallel Barking. I am your co-host, Ariana Backer, here with another co-host.
Woof woof, Larry Backer.
And we're here to talk about, I'm going to jump right into it, a movie called Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. But
Oh,
that's not
yum.
all.
Yum, yum. I'm hungry already.
We're also talking about US copyright law. And we're also talking about ownership. And we're also talking about
Oh, but I want to hear about poo, blood and money.
Blood and
Or
Honey.
poo, blood and honey. Or money, in a sense. Honey is money in this case. So what's the deal? What's the problem?
Well, Pooh and Piglet apparently are very, very butthurt about their friend Christopher Robin leaving them for college.
I
And
can understand that.
they get so hurt that they go on a rampage.
Oh, so they decide to hurt others.
Yes.
This sounds thoroughly modern.
Mm. And their their new visages are just so breathtakingly
Violent.
bloody
Okay,
and
so what's the problem?
dark. So there is no problem, but there might be a problem in the eyes of Disney.
Okay, now let's back up a second. Disney for a long time owned the copyright, that is the right to exploit the images of Winnie the Pooh and his minions. The way they had the right to exploit Mickey Mouse and some of their minions. And for a long time, the company and a host of others, with the collusion, some would say, or with the support, depending on your political views, of the American political establishment, have been able to extend the time that they had to exploit this and prevent other people from exploiting it as well. Because the way things work very roughly is that you have a right under certain circumstances, and if you follow certain forms and procedures, you have the right to a monopoly on the exploitation of your creative work.
Except this was not
For a
even
number of,
Disney's creative work. This was A. Milne's
yeah, but you can buy
children's
and sell,
book.
but you can also buy and sell the monopoly rights. It's
Okay.
property and ownership. So either you, or if you turn it into a commodity, the purchaser of this thing, and here's the real crux of it, have the right to prevent other people from doing it, so that we don't have BDSM, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger,
Aw.
because, or we have the owner of the copyright, for as long as the copyright lasts, controlling the image, right, and the exploitation of this thing, which Disney, especially with its key characters, like other companies, Disney is not unique here, has been able to turn for a very long time, much longer than one would have thought. But again, people prevailed on Congress to extend this for a much longer time than people way back thought either proper or just, except Disney thought it was both, to control this, and now the time has run out. And as we've seen with copyright law, it will continue to run out every year, right? When I think it's like 70 years, I forget what the formula is.
Yes.
It's 70 years,
the
right?
life.
So,
It's traditionally limited to the life of the author plus 70 years.
right. So it, time's up. And what that means is that now Winnie the Pooh is up for grabs.
Oh, wait, but the Copyright Term Extension Act, which was in 98,
Right.
protects corporate authorship for 95 years.
For 95 years, right? But however you sort this out, and this is why copyright lawyers make a lot of money. The rules are arcane, and everyone is fudging the numbers for their own benefit. At the end of the day, at the end of some day, creative work will come into the quote unquote public domain, and everyone would have the right to exploit it. Now, the right to exploit it doesn't mean that you're going to exploit it successfully, nor does it mean that if I do BDSM Winnie the Pooh, that I will have more than half a person come and certainly pay money to see it. It may be completely ignored. But the thing is that the old copyright owner cannot prevent me from going ahead and doing atrocious things to Winnie or Mickey or anyone else. And, hilarity then ensues. Or for companies that have exploited these images and have made a ton of money on that basis, and especially on its protection, now all of a sudden the value of this thing to them is reduced. And with it, they fear the value of their own franchise. Now, Disney has been very smart about all of this, as most of these companies. And so knowing that their ability to imprison these characters within these webs of copyright law to own them expires. There's really only one solution for a company like that, and that is to constantly produce new, cool, protected images so that you never get stuck in, that was Disney's classic mistake, Disney, Mickey Mouse. Disney doesn't want to be identified with one character. This is Marvel. This is all of the comic characters. You want to constantly be producing new characters so that you're known for your characters rather than for a particular character. So now we have.
But then you're risking poor content.
Well, maybe. Not that a lot of what was produced under the name of Winnie or Mickey might be Oscar worthy, although that's the Oscar is not worthy of itself either. But sure, that happens with characters or images or ideals that you've embedded within this image that you already produce. It doesn't really, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is that you're able to create more products. It's the same reason, although a variation of this, why cereal companies have 20 cereals instead of one, why cigarette companies have 40 cereals instead of the other. One is you're protecting your brand. So your brand isn't a particular image that you're going to lose control of eventually. It's a shop of them. It's the Marvel family. It's the Universal family. And at the same time, the more of these characters you have, the harder, the bigger, or the more extensive the barrier to entry is for competitors. So it's easy to compete against Mickey Mouse. I'll create Skeletor. I have no idea what the relationships of all these things are. So we'll have dueling characters. But what if I have Mickey, Minnie, Daffy, Moana, Lion King dude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've got all of them flitting around my theme parks. I can make movies, ice skating, spectaculars, blah, blah, blah. Now I've got a whole lot of them. And that helps. The question then is the way in which ownership and ownership rights exploitation tends to skew the way businesses look at the art of exploiting monopolies. And in this case, monopolies over creative work.
Well, and they've made a lot of money out of it. I mean, I know that investing advice companies have estimated Pooh and Friends generate about 3 billion, maybe to 6 billion annually for Disney.
Oh my God. So now I have the perfect, thank you. You've now given me the perfect idea. We're going to change the name of this podcast from Parallel Barking to Winnie and not Daffy. What's the other one? I'm horrible.
Donald.
No, Winnie characters. That poor donkey that needs
Eeyore. Oh
Eeyore,
my!
yes.
Now he's going to go actually drown himself in the river.
Who, Eeyore?
Yes.
I know.
Eeyore? You did it again.
Well, I'm so sorry. Eeyore is a manifestation of post-modernity in the West. and probably the most interesting character of the whole Winnie universe.
Exact. I love Eeyore. Eeyore is
So Eeyore is too self-reflexively sad,
the
the kind
most.
of postmodern way to love you back, because it's all about him and his suffering. Now he would be the perfect BDSM character in the
Wow. That would be way too deep.
God, especially if it's all, we can do it French style, so it's all mental rather than physical. And so
Mm.
we're talking about self-torture in the mind, and it would be a torture for the audience because all of this would be done over a cafe table while
Oh
you're sipping
no.
coffee.
Oh no, I could never look at Eeyore in the same way again.
That's right. So now we have an issue, and as we've seen with Disney and a bunch of others, an opportunity as well. But it is a problem for a lot of, for the business of creative content. Right. That's the, now a lot of people say, well, it's about time. Disney has been just quite ruthless
Well, they've been
in,
granted term extensions.
yeah, no, but they've also been quite ruthless. So if you have some little shop somewhere in the middle of nowhere with an image of Mickey, they'll get sued.
Mm.
Right? The protection of that thing becomes relentlessly important, and one can see why, because they are making a lot of money. The question for them now is, of course, now that everyone else can do it, and not just parody, but they can do all of this stuff. So what happens? And then the real question is, and this one's a hard one, because it's one thing to mock, like we're doing gently, to mock Disney and these overstuffed companies that are making a tremendous amount of money through the exploitation of the creativity of others that produce these marvelous figures in return for some kind of quote unquote market payment for labor. That's a different podcast. So they're exploiting in two different ways. They're exploiting artistic talent, and they're exploiting the product of that artistic talent. But and so generally speaking, there's relatively little sympathy there. They've made their money. They made their money off the backs of others who are not making money. But the real question is, one is tempted at this point to say, well, let's chuck the whole thing. But then how do you protect the young artist, the young creative person for whom this is the difference between being able to engage in creative activity and having to wait tables the rest of their lives and not create?
Well, I feel like NFTs were the beginning idea. That was the beginning thought,
Okay.
or at least for me, behind that for artists, because it kept the name, the integrity for the artist. You could resell the piece all you wanted and get all the money you wanted, but the author would continue to retain some sort of commission every time that piece was resold in an NFT.
Right, and that makes sense. And that might or might not change the complexion of copyright law. That is, the way in which we divvy up property and exploitation rights.
Right.
Right. And that would be kind of interesting. There's a side thing here that the Europeans have been far more advanced in than the Americans, certainly. And that is not just because this is a very typical, and for those of you who are not US based, you're all rolling your eyes and saying, oh my God, this is such an American conversation. That's the only thing they're thinking about is money. And you're sort of right. But pulling it out of the US and into, let's say, European context, we've got a related issue here. And that is not just the exploitation of the image for money, but the protection of the integrity of the image itself. Because the problem with Honey and Blood Winnie is not necessarily about whether Disney or someone else with the creative juices to make a serial killer Winnie the Pooh. The question is, by doing that, have you now destroyed the integrity of the creation itself, of the creation of Winnie the Pooh as it was created by its author. In Europe, the response has been to develop moral rights. So, for example, I buy, because I have more money than anyone else on earth, I buy the Mona Lisa for the purpose of defacing it, right? Of taking permanent markers and drawing a mustache on her. Or I buy Winnie the Pooh for the purpose of doing Winnie the Pooh serial killer movies, 20 of them, because I've got the money to do this. And there the question, and probably the more interesting question for us, especially when you're dealing with creative materials, and especially when you're dealing not with parody or with study or with examination, but you're dealing with absolutely hijacking the image. To what extent ought we to be worrying about the protection of the integrity of creative works? And to what extent should we not? From an American perspective, it's not an American perspective. Let me change that. From a market commodity approach
There you go.
to this, a market's commodity approach, because anyone can be market's commodity approach, whether you're Marxist-Leninist, a capitalist in the US or in Uruguay. From that perspective, the answer is your connection with the object ended with its creation. If you mean to protect it, keep it, but then the price you pay is the inability to exploit it, and exploit it by either conveying the image out or by getting a reward. And that, in fact, once you create the work, like once you create a child, at some point that thing becomes autonomous of you. It's up there, and if it goes
wants
off,
to
yeah,
do
yeah,
whatever it wants to do, it does it.
or right,
Yeah.
and I mean, you've sold it, and we certainly, virtually everyone on earth, with respect to ordinary products, finds this an unremarkable proposition. I buy a stereo system and I buy it solely for the purpose of taking a sledgehammer to it, because that's the way I feel better with myself. And I've got the money to invest this. Or I take a refrigerator and I paint it. No one really is bothered in that context with the transformation of objects. And yet we also know that some of these objects have been turned into art in and of themselves. Duchamp, of course, was famous with his urinal,
Yeah.
right, for doing this. So you've got an ordinary object to art. You can deface it. You can buy a urinal and deface it, but can you buy Duchamp's urinal and deface it? Now you've got the same object, but it's a very different object. And that's where the question comes in. And, some people say, well, from a commodity control perspective, yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely. But other people say from the perspective of the protection of the cultural basis of society, that effectively inhibits cultural production and cultural growth and advancement, and therefore something.
I totally disagree with that. I mean,
Okay.
inhibiting the change of the original in the first place is inhibiting cultural growth and
Okay, so you don't mind Winnie the Pooh serial killer?
no, not at all.
Series. And you don't mind me buying the Mona Lisa and taking permanent ink and putting a mustache on her?
No, if the Liv decided to, for some reason, ridiculously like,
It's not that ridiculous. France could be facing an existential crisis. No petroleum.
fine.
No
If they
food.
decided to sell it and they decided it was worth it, then
And they
that
sell
was
it
their
to an absolutely
prerogative.
crazy person who's got more money than God.
Then fine. Then that was the prerogative, and then now it is
Gone.
it is a piece of art that will now change into
Another piece of art.
another piece of art. It's now living a new life.
Oh my God, this is out of the first Batman.
Yeah.
Joker. This is the Joker character.
I
Right.
mean,
All right, but you actually make a very, very interesting and difficult point. And that is is converting Winnie the Pooh from Winnie the Pooh, the nice bear that has a taste for honey, into Winnie the Pooh serial killer, which is hypothetical I'm using. Is that really destroying something, or is that actually creating new art? And should we be less worried about being a museum culture, doing nothing but preserving, and be more active in terms of the way in which society continues to reinvent itself by taking its past and reshaping it?
You know
And
the answer. You know it's going to be number 2 for me.
I know it's going to be number 2 for you. But interestingly enough, for the last 150 or 200 years at least, Western culture certainly has moved to door number 1. And in part, that's reflected, and it's interesting, we go from Winnie the Pooh and the loss of copyright to the larger issue underlying a lot of this stuff is the transformation of our culture into not one that's looking so much forward, but one that is looking to preserve. And we see this everywhere. It's just a museum culture. Artifacts are created, artifacts were created, artifacts have to be repatriated, they have to be protected, they have to be placed in specialized locations, they have to be admired, and to some extent they have to be worshipped, and they have to remain untouched. And we do that not just in the context of museums, we've turned cities into museums. We cannot destroy buildings, we cannot destroy streets. We've done that with respect to the social ordering of our cultures. We cannot destroy gentrification is a way of museum culturing. Despite all of the other problems with gentrification, but there's a little bit of this museum acculturation going on at the same time. And at some point, you have to stop and ask yourself, well, if what we're doing is standing still long enough to look backwards, what does that say about the nature of our culture? Have we become now culturally, have we changed the basic character of our culture from one that embraces change through iterative reworkings of its own cultural production? Or is it one that the basis of which is merely the preservation and, in a sense, the worship of its past? The answer that we normally get is, well, we have space for 2. So that downtown Barcelona must remain intact. It was cemented for eternity when the Romans put up their wall at the end of the late antique, and it was further cemented when the benighted medieval people then destroyed some of it and built their own medieval stuff. And all of that stuff is old and it cannot be, and then there's 19th century
Well,
stuff
it's
and it cannot be
taken
touched.
La
It cannot
Sagrada
be touched.
Familia over 100 years to be built. It's not going to even be finished until 2026.
And once it is done, it will never be able to be touched. And so their response is yes. The minute you finish something, it's locked in place for eternity, which means that if you're going to have progress, you're going to have progress outside. So where is Barcelona growing? Barcelona is not growing in its center. Barcelona is growing all around the center. The center becomes dead in a sense.
The
It becomes a
preserve.
museum. Paris,
Yes.
to some extent, London, and everything. It grows outward, and what remains inside is maintained because of the way in which we have taught ourselves, we've acculturated ourselves into viewing the act of museuming as a positive economic thing, and the proof of that pudding is tourism.
Yeah.
And so our entire culture now and our cultural mechanics, our mechanics of cultural exchanges and the like, is all based on the notion that we must all now travel to all kinds of places to see in situ the evidences and workings of what had been probably a much more unconscious about itself past.
Well, that's slowly changing with the places building up new buildings that have, taken amazing technologies
Right,
to
on
be
the
constructed.
exterior, but on the exterior. And in a sense, you have to ask yourself, well, if that's the case, and we're also worried about things like sustainability and paving over the earth, museum cultures, which will tend to spread us over the earth in ways that which that hog the land from that other group of flora and fauna that also probably ought to be preserved as well, and that's the animal and plant kingdoms. You can't constantly lock whatever you've built into an eternal space that cannot be touched, because we have to preserve this past for the
Oh yeah,
purpose of
absolutely not.
tourism, and then build out further or build out somewhere else, and then not expect that it won't have effects on others. At some point,
Yeah.
this becomes, there's a fundamental contradiction here that has to be addressed. But it's there, and so something that we started out, this is like pulling a string and then watching the whole sweater unravel. Something that seemed to be as straightforward as, oh, ha ha ha, Winnie the Pooh is now a blood
A
and honey,
bloody
yeah,
horror
yeah,
movie.
and a serial killer is actually more a comment on a much more complex relationship between society and its own sense, construction, reconstruction, and preservation of itself. Of course, with windfalls to a bunch of people who are strategically placed with respect to creative activity, as much as it is about the nature, place, role, and function of creative acts within a society in which those are viewed both as objects and as cultural expression. So perhaps what we need to do is find some nature preservationist society to buy the 9-acre wood, kick out, what's the boy's name?
Christopher Robin.
Yeah, yes, him. Kick out Christopher Robin, put Winnie and his friends in highly monitored panoptic cages, and then eventually get rid of them so that we could bring in some sort of Jurassic Park reconstruction, or pave over the 9-acre woods and turn it into a she shopping center that sells only fair trade goods and
Or since we've been
organically.
talking about tourism, let's just change it into a tourist spot,
I'm still voting for
a
the
resort.
25 movie set of Winnie the Pooh serial killer.
I am actually excited about seeing this.
Right, and the first person that he goes after is Mickey Mouse.
You don't think Donald? I mean, I would be
No,
really
I think there's
excited.
I don't know if
Tigger
the
is
copyright has run
actually
out. The copyright has not run, may not have run out on Donald. But I don't know. I haven't kept up. But whoever is non-copyrighted. But anyway, that's all I got.
well, yeah, I mean, because Tigger first appeared in 1928 and is still protected by copyright. So
Yeah, but not for much
unfortunately,
longer.
he
Yeah, but
won't
not for
appear.
much. Yeah, but not for much longer. Um, yeah, that's 28 is still a long time ago. But again, we've got a huge slew, the Marvel universe of Disney characters that will make them, and Disney has been sort of downplaying them, these characters, as they get older and older, for two reasons. One, they know copyright is up, and two, the people who really love them also have a tendency to die. If you loved Winnie the Pooh in the 1930s, chances are there's not much left of you in 2022.
Yeah, you're
And
going to have
certainly
to come
even
up
less
with
of you in
some
2040.
unique content.
Right. And so the people who are now growing up and spending money on their kids are the people who grew up on Little Mermaid and Belle and the other one.
Yeah, the
Right.
other one.
Right. The princess heroine epics from the 80s. Right. And then there'll be the generation that's coming up has got another slew. So if you're smart, you basically you cycle these so that you exploit your creative resources who you're underpaying to create generationally contingent creative characters that can then be exploited. They'll all walk, talk, and act like the prior ones, but the they'll be more suited to the current context, and they'll be protected for however, certainly through the lifespan of the people who will grow up, in which those folks are part of their lives, and they'll get all sentimental and spend money and then spend $3,100,000 to go to these theme parks to see them and feel young again or whatever, and introduce their children to it.
I say,
as we all
go
did,
for it.
including me, so I'm no innocent here.
Yeah, Disneyland.
Right. All right, final words.
I say art is meant to be changed over time.
God, you're so modern.
Yeah.
And I say the debates about art is art itself, and I will enjoy the show.
All right.
Woof woof.
Bark bark. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time.